Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum and good morning. Thank you for joining us for APM Guest Lecture Series organized by Academy Professor Malaysia. My name is Zaharul. I'm a lecturer at University Malaysia Terengganu, your MC for this morning. Before we begin, please allow me to draw your attention to a few housekeeping matters. Please make sure that you are in silent or muted mode. And to ask questions to the speakers, please use the chat box stating your affiliation together with your questions. And for those who are interested to get an e-certificate, please fill in the Google form that will be shared later in the chat box. And thank you for your cooperation. And without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Dato Engineer Dr. Muhammad Saleh Jaafar, President of Academy Professor Malaysia, to deliver his opening remarks. Dr. Saleh, please.
Thank you, Dr. Zaharul. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang dihormati Profesor Dr. Wong Chin Huat, Deputy Head, United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Asia Headquarters at Sunway University, our honorable speaker this morning. Yang dihormati Profesor Dr. Azizul Halim Yahya, CEO of Institute of Continuing Education and Professional Studies UITM, our moderator this morning. Yang dihormati Profesor Dr. Muhammad Azizuddin Muhammad Sani, Professor in Politics and International Relations, UUM College of Law, Government and International Relations, as our first discussant today. Yang dihormati Dr. Francis Loh Kok Wah, former Professor of Politics, USM, and Senior Advisor, Forum of Federations based in Ottawa, Canada, as our second discussant this morning. APM Council members, APM members, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning and salam sejahtera to all. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for attending our APM Guest Lecture Series today. APM Guest Lecture Series is one of our flagship programs organized by Academy Professor Malaysia, APM. Other flagship programs by the Academy include APM Fellow Lecture Series, APM Roundtable Discussions, APM Conference, and APM Webinar or Forums, or called Wacana Academy Professor. This lecture series is organized as a sign of respect and also to honor distinguished scholars in our country and distinguished personalities who have excelled in their chosen fields of expertise. They have given impacts through their substantial contributions in their respective fields of knowledge and contributions to the society throughout their career. This lecture series also serves as a platform for scholars to discuss strategic and important issues that will not only benefit the policymakers, but also the community as a whole. We do hope this initiative by Academy will be part of the whole concept of nation buildings for Malaysia. So far, APM has organized 8 lecture series delivered by Professor Datuk Dr. Asmah Ismail, our current President for Academy Science Malaysia, Professor Dr. John Esposito, Distinguished Professor Datuk Dr. Raja Rasya, Distinguished Professor Datuk Dr. Samsul Amri, Professor Dr. Wang Gungwu, Professor Dr. James Chin, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, and the last guest lecture was delivered by Professor Tan Sri Dr. Datuk Sri Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali. Today, APM is very honored and privileged to have Professor Dr. Wong Chin Huat to deliver a lecture on a very important topic, GE15 and beyond, coalition politics and nation buildings in post-majoritarianism Malaysia. This topic is very timely as we are all going to polling stations in about 10 days' time. I take note that there are 3 important keywords in today's topics: coalition politics, nation buildings, and majoritarianism, or very difficult to pronounce, or I simply call them majority rules. I hope I'm right in simplifying the terms here. And this topic is obviously applicable in other nations, especially the countries with diverse populations, countries with multiple races and multiple faiths. This country, including Malaysia, may face difficulties to balance the call to fulfill the demands of the majority and at the same time to address the needs and the concerns of the minority. In many countries, the minority actually forms a huge population. China, for example, has a minority population of over 40 million people, which is actually more than the whole population of Malaysia. In fact, India has a minority population of over 100 million people. A question one may ask, how does a majority rule affect such countries with huge minority populations? Or in fact, for that matter, address minority population for that matter. Today, through this lecture by our guest lecture today, we hope to understand the concept and applications of majority rules in a nation building in the context of Malaysia. We also hope to be able to answer to some extent the questions of, can we professionalize Malaysian politics? As a renowned political scientist, Professor Wong is highly qualified to speak in this topic. Allow me to read a brief biodata of Professor Wong. Professor Wong Chin-Huat is the Deputy Strategy for United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Asia Headquarters at Sunway University. He was trained in comparative politics at University of Essex, UK, and he specializes in electoral system, party system, parliamentary democracy, and identity politics. Professor Wong sees Malaysia's decommoditization is going on the right path, moving away from one coalition's predominance to two coalition rivalry, and now multi-partyisms in hung parliament. After the Sheraton move, he has advocated many new ideas to stabilize politics, including confidence and supply agreement, equal constituency allocation for elected representatives, recall fixed-term parliament, and public finance of political parties, some of which have already been implemented. In 2021, he and his Sunway University colleague, Wo Changzi, also co-authored a white paper on top-up women-only additional seats for the Penang state, an innovative 3-in-1 design to introduce gender quota, proportionality, and non-constituency seats. He's a founding member of the Coalition for Clean and Fair Election, Bersih, in 2006, and continues to serve as a resource person. In 2018 to 2020, he was also the cluster head for electoral system and constituency delimitations in the Electoral Reform Committee under Prime Minister's Department. Professor Wong's political commentaries in English, Malay, Chinese are featured in domestic and international media, including Sinar Harian, Astro Awani, Astro AEC, Malaysia Kini, Contemporary Review, The Star, The Edge, Utusan Malaysia, South China Morning Post, Project Syndicate, and New York Times. We hope and we are certain that we will benefit from Professor Wong's lecture and the commentaries from our two discussants, Professor Dr. Muhammad Azizuddin Muhammad Sani and Dr. Francis Loh this morning, as well as from our moderator, Professor Dr. Azizul Halim Yahya. So thank you very much, everyone, again for attending this, and let's pay attention to the lecture and also to the discussion that is going through this morning. And I hand over the session to our MC, Dr. Zahrul.
Thank you, Dr. Saleh. Now I would like to invite Professor Dr. Azizul Halim Yahya, CEO of Institute of Continuing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zahrul. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning to everyone. Respected friends yang berbahagia, Professor Dato' IR Dr. Muhammad Saleh Jaafar, the President of APM, yang dihormati Professor Dr. Wong Chin-Huat, Deputy Head Strategy, United Nations Sustainable Development Solution Network, Asia Headquarters, Sunway University. Yang dihormati Professor Dr. Muhammad Azizuddin Muhammad Sani, Professor Politics, International Relations, UUM's College of Law, Governments and International Relations. And finally, Yang Dihormati Dr. Francis Loh Kok Kua, former Professor of Politics, USM, and also Senior Advisor, Forum of Federations, Ottawa. And to all APM councils members and APM members, fellow professors, students, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be here with all of you for addressing this pertinent topic to discuss this appropriate topic, especially when our general election is around the corner. I will talk a little bit, 1 or 2 minutes, that we're experiencing changing landscapes in expressing our voting or our view in the previous general elections, in elections GE14 or GE13. And we experienced the uncertainty for many couple of years. And these times, I believe the peoples are looking forward to look at what will be the decision made after these general elections 15. Because this will contribute the stability of our country and also our future. That's what I believe. So as what Dr. Wong will be talking about, he will be talking as what Dr. Muhammad Saleh mentioned just now, that well, it is a changing patterns that we believe we need to look at again, because of the arrangements of the political party have changed for a couple of years, and then we can see how it changed again this time. So today we have with us the distinguished Professor Wong Chin Huat from Sunway to give his lecture entitled General Election 15 and Beyond Coalitions, Politics and Nation Building in a Post-Majoritarianism. So without much further ado, Professor Wong, you have 45 minutes, and please come to the screen or to the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Azizul Halim Yahya. A very good morning and salam sejahtera to Professor Dato Muhammad Saleh Jaafar and Professor Azizul Halim Yahya, of course, and our esteemed discussant, Professor Muhammad Azizuddin, and also Professor and also my old friend, Dr. Francis Loh, and to friends from Academy Professor Malaysia and beyond in this Zoom room, and also at the YouTube channel of ABM and Astro Awani. Thanks to Astro Awani for featuring us. It's indeed a great honor for me to be invited to give this guest lecture by ABM. And I hope that my sharing would be useful for our discussions as we are looking ahead and to what happened next after 19th of November. So I would like to talk about coalition politics and nation building in post-majoritarianism Malaysia. So I would touch on all this concept and then look at GE15 and beyond before coming to the questions that can we professionalize our politics to make it better, because we know that many people have feel disappointed by our politics. I will start with the concept. When we talk about majoritarianism, in simple terms, it means that the winner will take all. And Alan Large-Part, a great political scientist, proposed two prototypes of democracy. One is majoritarian, the other one is consensus. The common features in majoritarian democracy includes, among others, single party majority government, as opposed to broad coalition government, executive dominance, as opposed to a legislative and executive balance, two-party system as opposed to multi-party system, first past the post electoral system as opposed to proportional representation.
Sorry to interrupt, Prof. Wong.
Yes.
Could you please put your slides in the presentation?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to press that.
All right, thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you. So first past the post as opposed to proportional representation, and unitary states opposed to federalism or decentralization. And in particular, I want to talk about Westminster majoritarianism because that's the reference point for many of us when we think about politics due to the colonial legacy. In UK, we have single-party majority government for most of the time, and more than that, alternation between two broad-based parties. And thirdly, these two parties would compete towards the center. In political science, we call that centripetalism. I want to add on, there are two other features that often get overlooked. One is backbench reward, meaning that government MPs who are not minister or deputy minister, the backbenchers, they can actually vote against government motions and bills. Even though theoretically they can be punished, but most of the time, they will just simply get away. I give you one of the most illustrative example, Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader of British Labour Party. From 1997 to 2010, when his party was the government, he, as a backbencher, defied the party whip for 428 times. Now, that's 33 times per year. He was never denied, he was never sacked from the party, nor denied candidacy, as what happened to many popular incumbents this round. And why so? Because in British politics, the candidates for the parties are selected mainly by the party branches. So it's a bottom-up process. Now, next, let's look at coalition building. In comparative terms, when we talk about coalitions, we actually mean post-election coalitions, meaning the parties, members of the coalitions were competitors in the elections. They form coalitions only after election to either to be government in most cases, in some cases, to be a legislative pact or alliance. If the coalition has a majority in the House, that's the majority coalition, and that would give us what we understand as stability, as in single party majority government. If these coalitions consist of the major party from both sides of the spectrum, then it is called a grand coalition, as what we had in the last German federal government headed by Angela Merkel. But it is also possible for a post-election coalition to be a minority. For example, the first New Zealand government under Jacinda Ardern. Her party, Labour, and her partner, New Zealand First Party, they only commanded less than 50% of the seats in the parliament. And they depended on the support of Green Party on a confidence and supply agreement. In Malaysia, when we talk about coalition, we would assume that coalitions would be pre-election coalitions, because that has been the model we had since 1952, or more accurately, 1955, when the Alliance won a landslide in our first national election. And the common feature of that is that the component parties in the coalitions would put up a single slate of candidates. So they would not compete against each other. And why do they do so? One is to pool the vote together under the first past the post electoral system. Second is to share power after point in the election as well, because voters may be very national in outlook that they want a stable government. If a pre-election coalition persists over time, then you can consider that as a permanent coalition. And it would evolve almost to become one single party, while the component members would just become like formalized factions. Next, before we talk about nation building, it's important to formally introduce the term nations and states. Of course, both terms have many definitions. I would like to cite Benedict Anderson's for nation, which is an imagined political community, imagined as both inherently limited and sovereign. So we are talking about people here having the same idea of who they are and what common faith they have, and so on. Then we have the state, and of course, I would cite Max Weber's authoritative definition here. State is a monopolist in the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. And the relationship between this nation and state can lead us to think about that a nation must have a state, and that's the nation state. And often it would stress on commonalities, homogeneities, and so on. But Linz and Stepan also argue that you can actually have a state reverse that relationship to build a nation out of a multi-ethnic, multicultural state. So such state nations like India would be much more accommodative and diverse. So when we talk about nation building here, it can mean a wide range of things, from a very accommodative integrations to some cohesive assimilation. And our very own Professor Samsu AB and Dr. Anis proposed that we should look at the traditional concern of national unity in a broader sense, that they argue that while we may not be able to achieve national unity, we should strive for social cohesion and reconciliations, such that we can actually agree to disagree and move on politically. Now, how are these concepts applied in Malaysia? I'll go very quickly. Lijpat, the same political scientist we mentioned just now, in his early work in 1977, characterized Malaysia as a consultational democracy, by which he listed 4 features in consultational democracy. The first is grand coalition, second is mutual veto, third, proportionality, and fourth, segmental autonomy. Strictly speaking, only segmental autonomy is found in Malaysia or Malaya then, because we have different communities with different social, cultural structures, from association to schools and so on. We have some sort of proportionality in a very big sense in the beginning. In the early independence years, there was not really a mutual veto, but decision-making was attempted to be as inclusive as possible. But what really gave rise to this characterization that Malaya was a consultational democracy was grand coalition. Lijpat thought that when you have Malay, Chinese, and Indian to be represented by 3 parties in government, they took away the competitions between the groups. So we have a grand coalition. But this is actually quite different from grand coalitions. In his original idea of consultational democracy in Europe, over there, grand coalitions are formed only after elections. And it's meant to be provisional, meaning at the end of the parliamentary term, the component parties of the grand coalitions would continue to compete against each other. So it does not take away their competition. I just merely want to share power between rivals. And after 1969, the so-called constitutionalism has been gradually replaced with Malay dominance. We have to understand that the 1969 general election was practically a Malay tsunami pass, won 10% point of Peninsula Woods from UMNO in that election, despite a very minimal increase of parliamentary seats from 9 to 12. And the outcome of that, as we all know, is the National Economic Policy, National Culture Policy, the Amendment to Sedition Act, and Article 10, Clause 4 of our Federal Constitution to ban discussions or questionings on matters like citizenship, national language, the special positions of the Malays and Bumiputra, and also the monarchy. And in 1973, we have malapportionments of constituency since then. And in 1974, the alliance was expanded to become the Barisan Nasional to absorb both Sabah and Sarawak alliance, as well as 3 opposition parties. In 1986, and UMNO parliamentarians, Abdullah Ahmad coined the term Ketuanan Melayu. Now, this is what people normally talk about. I want to bring your attention to another versions of Malay nationalism that is framed in a very radical form of anti-colonialist narrative. This is Amanat Hadi. He said in 1981, we fight BN because it preserved the colonialist constitution, because it was drafted under the supervisions of the British government, the infidels law, the common law, and the pre-Islamic rule, or in Malay, peraturan jahiliah. So what he argued for then is a restoration of pre-colonial order based on Sharia. Now I want to come back to this idea of consociationalism, and because what we had from 1955 to 1990 is a one coalition predominance. The idea that this was a constitutional democracy is not true, as what Professor Donald Horowitz pointed out. In an environment of ethnic conflict, there is room for only one multi-ethnic parties or alliance. After one such party establishes itself, all the electoral opportunities are located on the ethnic flanks. So what you have was from Alliance National Front, because it was multi-ethnic, it constantly got attacked by opposition from both sides. The Malay opposition, especially PAS, would attack Alliance and Barisan Nasional for not being Malay or Muslim enough. While the non-Malay opposition, almost all of them were theoretically socialist or social democratic party, would take the positions of the minority to criticize BN for too pro-Malays and discriminative towards the non-Malays. Now, what we are seeing here is unidimensionalities of politics. Things are seen as, on one end, Malay Muslim, and on the other end, minorities' interests. So in such situation, what we find that this is far different from the grand coalitions in the European countries, because this consociational setup doesn't take away the ethnic tension. It doesn't reduce ethnic tension over time. Instead, the centrist party, the coalition here, would constantly get attacked, and the price to be paid by the opposition is that they themselves became unelectable as well. how can we move away from what the pessimistic predictions of Professor Horowitz, which was very true, and require a change, a help from UMNO. The Sikhisms of a split in UMNO produce a splinter party that could then brought PAS and DAP together to form the multi-ethnic opposition coalition. The first attempt was Gagasan Rakyat, multi-ethnic, and the Muslim Angkatan Perpaduan Ummah, all Muslim. Two coalitions joined with the common leader in Semangat 46. And the next attempt was the Barisan Alternative. So when you have here, when the opposition joined together with an UMNO splinter party, they reduce their radical positions from the flank. So you see a shrinking of the first dimension, and at the same time, a second dimension emerges. So you have reform on the opposition end and stability on the BN end. So that's what we had until 1990 and 2015. What happened since 2015 was a very interesting transition. And before that, from 2008 to 2015, we have height of bipartisan. That was the closest time that we are to the British styles of bipartisan. From 2015 to 2018, you have a tripartite competitions between BN, PH, and PAS. This is, of course, BN miscalculation based on the result of two by-elections. And what is interesting is 2018 to 2020, we have a different type of bipartisan. It's one of a multi-ethnic government in PH and a mono-ethnic opposition in UMNO and PAS. That led to the collapse of PH government through the Sheraton move. And what we had after the Sheraton move from 2022 today until 2022 is that we have a hung parliament. Now, what caused these changes is the denationalizations of East Malaysian politics. This is a fundamental reason why we are having hung parliament. Because after the defeat of BN in 2018, the East Malaysian Party, in particular GPS, and then later UMNO Sabah, and also in between them, the PDM parties moved out of Barisan Nasional. And with all this party going on their own, you look at GPS and its splinter, PSB, GRS, UMNO Sabah, and Warisan, another splinter from UMNO, going on their own, there's almost no way that we're going to have a simple single-party majority government unless a national coalition, meaning BN, PH, or PN, can win close to 112 seats, or at least close to 100 seats. And so that's not possible. And what we see after that was decoupling of federal and state politics, because this round, we have had 4 elections other than Sarawak, 3 early elections before this round. And now you have 6 states decided to go on their own, perhaps to full terms. So this is the first time we have a majority of states staying out from the federal elections since 1959. And we also have we also seeing the signs that permanent coalitions are ending, because even when these coalitions, when you have the coalition partners taking on each other. It started with the Sabah elections. You have 1/4 of seats contested by BN, PN, and PBS. All these were members of the federal government then. And you see full contestation between BN and PN in both Malacca and Johor. So these are the transitions we have gone through. It's very unsettling for many Malaysians because these are things that we do not know. And these are things that we never asked for those who have voted in 2018 for a two-party system, two-coalition system. And that's why there have been a lot of disillusionment and disappointment. And if you like, if you take a longer horizon, we have basically just gone back to 1978 and 1986, because at that time, you have BN sandwiched by PAS on the right and DAP on the left. And today, we basically have PAS expanded into PN and DAP expanded into PH after the two coalition system period. And of course, what would be different from 78 and 86 is that we also now have the second dimension between reform and stability. Even you look at PN, you look at BN, they all want to talk about reform on the institutional end. Now, where do we go from here? What would happen after the 19th of November? What would happen to political competition, stability, and accountability? I am not proposing that I have a crystal ball before me that I can tell you what the outcome is. This is not a presentation from Merdeka Center and so on. What I want to suggest or invite you to join is to imagine what's going to happen after 19 November. Regardless what's the outcome, we are likely to see some common patterns here. And it's important for us to be prepared rather to be shocked and surprised or panic. It would be a hung parliament. It's inevitable because the East Malaysian Party will win possibly over 40 out of 57 seats. Here, I exclude UMNO Sabah. So the rest, and of course PH. So the rest are basically the East Malaysian parties that we talk about. And with that, given that situation, no national coalitions can win close to about 100 seats in Peninsula, unless the second condition change. Otherwise, hung parliament becomes inevitable. But some people express fear of hung parliament because they characterize that the last 3 years since Sheraton moved as a political mess. I would argue against this simplistic judgment because comparatively, hung parliament can still deliver political stability, economic dynamism, and social inclusion. We have good example in Germany, Canada, New Zealand, Denmark, and so on. And in Malaysia, hung parliament with the MOU delivery has delivered greater stability and more reforms than even the PH majority government. We talked about anti-hopping law. Was that so difficult to be delivered by PH? No. The only reason that it did not happen was because the dominant party, the Prime Minister party, Bersatu, in the PH government, benefited from party crossing. That's the reason why we did not have it. Is it so difficult to have equal constituency allocations for all MPs or for opposition MPs? No. PH did not do it because they were trapped in this dominance mentality. For all the talk that they wanted a two-coalition system, when they got into power, they were more interested or subconsciously positioned themselves to be the new dominance coalition. But for hung parliament to really work, like in Germany, Canada, New Zealand, Denmark, and so on, it needs clear and pragmatic rules for coexistence of different parties, of governments and oppositions. how should we form post-election coalition government? First, we must remember or be prepared that government formation takes time. It may take up to a week. That was about the time we took for the Muhyiddin government to be formed after Sheraton move. So don't be panicked. And there is a joke from Germany, if you like. I know some Malaysians probably find it unbearable. They have their elections in September. But 2 elections ago, the government could not be formed until December. So the joke then was like, would Christmas come first or new government come first? Good for them. They got the government before Christmas. But the last election, the last government before this one, they took government formation took beyond Christmas. It came only as Easter present. Why? German party actually engaged in the negotiation, not just over like which ministry we got and which ministry you will get, but they were very much into manifesto. So they want to make sure this work. Now, before we go further on that, what I want to argue is that if we're going to have a coalition government, or on top of that, if the government feel that there's a need to sign a confidence and supply agreement with some of the opposition parties, all these agreements should be made public. That's the only way we can ensure promises would be kept, and we would not have political power struggle, controversies, smear campaign emerging over unfulfilled promises. We have had seen in very recent memory how Tun Dr. Mahathir reneged on his promise to pass the baton to Anwar Ibrahim, and also the unfulfilled promise by Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri to Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin on appointments of Deputy Prime Minister. And I must warn that the new government may even collapse if the budget or the financial bill cannot be passed. So the government would face after elections, will face 2 immediate tests on political stability. One is formation of government. Second is the test on the budget. Now, to be accurate, it's very unlikely that we can get the budget passed because the government probably would be formed and settled down with its business by early December. And it would not be in time for the budget to be passed because it takes weeks. So what is likely is the government would table a bill for the parliament to grant it some withdrawal from the consolidated front. But if that bills get defeated, it will be considered as defeating a budget. So it's important for the negotiations on government formation to take into account of all this. And probably you want to go beyond just a simple majority, that you might want to sign another CSA with the opposition, with some of the opposition. This is what happened in New Zealand. Well, because they did not have a majority, but it's important for us to buy extra insurance. And I think what is important is also coalition negotiation should use manifesto to assess compatibility. Otherwise, we would have a blame game at some point by the next elections or even before that, that coalition partner would blame each other that why this is not done and so on. It should be clearly spelled out, and therefore it is important that this round we have 3 national coalitions came out with clear manifesto for the post-election negotiation. They should fall back to this. Certainly you will not be able to get everything you want, but it's important for everyone to know what are each red lines that you must not cross. And potential coalition partners should refrain from excessive hostility in this election. If you are at each other's throat now, it'll be very hard for you to hug and kiss after election. That's just simple human nature. And the government should aim to last full term till 2027 to deliver economic confidence. Many international friends I talk to, from diplomats to business people, they express lack of confidence because things are so unpredictable. They want to know how long would the government last, when the next election would be. All this guessing game on election day, trying to catch the opposition by surprise, have to be thrown out of window. Old politics has to give way to the new one. And what about Prime Minister or Chief Minister candidates? We must recognize that this is a parliamentary system. Prime Minister or Chief Minister is the one who can command confidence from the majorities of MPs or ADUN, not necessarily the most popular ones amongst voters. People always have to remember this. And if we think whoever can assemble a majority in the House is not so trustworthy and so on, the solution should be about crippling or restricting his or her power, rather than trying to overthrow the Prime Minister using every possible means. And the next point I want to stress is that there should be only one name from the coalition government bloc to be presented to the palace. It's very, very irresponsible to our democracy and economy, as well as to the fundamental idea of constitutional monarchy, to say that my party or my coalitions will submit a few names and let the palace decide. You are basically shifting the responsibility to the palace and drag the palace, the monarch, the constitutional monarch, into partisan politics. That's very irresponsible. And Malaysians, opinion leaders, media must make it clear that this is unacceptable. Otherwise, why would people go to vote in elections if whatever outcome mediated through the parties cannot be respected? And to protect the new Prime Minister, Chief Minister from immediate occurrence of no confidence vote, we should have a confirmatory vote of confidence or investiture. That should happen within 2 weeks after his or her appointment. That would take away, that would function like a vaccine. If you pass, you table a motion of confidence in yourself and get it passed, it takes away the excuse for your opponent to bring you down immediately. And we must talk about decentralization. As I said earlier, the decoupling of federal and state politics is good because it may discourage hate politics. Why? When parties need to contemplate that I may join force with party B, with coalition B at the federal government against C and D, but maybe with C against B and D in state X, and maybe C and B with D against C and B in state Y. That would force us to be more rational, because ultimately, you know, this is an ongoing game and you cannot afford to go to the extreme, because that will limit your choices. But going beyond this, I think we need to deal with decentralization very carefully. The rise of East Malaysia is inevitable and should be welcome, but it should also be honestly and prudently managed. To promise 35% of parliamentary seats to a segment of electorate that constitute only 17% is politically expedient and irresponsible. Why? This may create a situation in GE16. Let's say a bloc from East Malaysia won about 30% of seats with 10% of popular support. They may become the largest bloc in the federal government. But the popular support for this federal government may be less than 30% or 40%. How can we have stable politics if the majority of the majority party does not command anything close to a majority in the parliament? Asking for trouble. But for such political expediency to emerge, it really has to do with the fact that West Malaysian politicians refuse to think through about decentralization. We do not have a real commitment to decentralization. Therefore, but at the same time, it becomes so politically incorrect for you to say no to Sabah and Sarawak. So you have nothing else to offer except to give all these lip services. I don't think such promise of 35% of parliamentary seats can actually get a 2/3 to be passed through. But giving unfulfillable promise would eventually just lead East Malaysia to greater disappointment and disillusions. So what we really need is well-thought decentralization that should devolve powers from the federalists to the concurrent and stateless. It should include fiscal decentralization, sharings of income tax revenue, and not just about petroleum. Why this is important? Because we should talk about decentralization as a nationwide project. It's not just pacifications or appeasement, rightly so, to East Malaysia. What we should do is to decentralize power from Putrajaya to all the states, but always guarantee more for Sabah and Sarawak. And it's important for Sabah and Sarawak to move away from the 1963 mindset, thinking that the federal government is just a Malaya government. No, Malaya is not England.
Just a gentle reminder, you got another 10 more minutes, Prof. Wong. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. I'll come to the end as well. England doesn't have regional governments. We have 11 states here, and 9 of them have a constitutional monarchy. And decentralization should also strengthen the Senate, Dewan Negara, as a primary guardian of state rights. It should be 100% elected and 70% each for Sabah and Labuan and Sarawak. Why? So that they have a veto. If your real concern is to have a veto power to increase your negotiation power, what we need is over-representation in Dewan Negara, not Dewan Rakyat. And finally, we should introduce decentralization within Sabah and Sarawak so that you will have power devolved from Kuching to Kapit, from Kota Kinabalu to Keningau. And it should not stop at creating state-level warlords. And I want to touch very quickly about abstentions and political apathy and vote suppressions. The last 4 state elections show us a very troubling picture that the number of abstention has gone up, and it is caused by 2 problems. One is political apathy. that I call it the party Aku Malas Undi, too lazy to vote party. In particular, you look at Malacca and Johor, it has gone from 34% to 45%. And the second problem is vote suppressions. The number you see here, 33% for Sabah and 39% for Sarawak, is actually not too surprising, especially for Sarawak. Their state election has always been between 60% to 70%. Why? Because we do not have absentee voting facilities. And we have so many Sabahan and Sarawakians having to study and work outside the state because of regional imbalance. But we have the same things in Kelantan. We have so many Kelantanese people working, say, in Klang Valley and Johor Bahru. Why do they all have to go home? Why can't they vote where they are? And we have candidacy selections problem this round. And in fact, this is a very complicated problem because you have competing consideration alongside seat negotiation due to coalition politics. Parties want to retain stronghold, they want to expand territory, and therefore put their strong leaders in some new constituency. But they also want to respect the local or grassroots preferences. They want to cultivate new talents. They want to enhance women, youth, minority representations. But what we have seen is the purgings of some popular incumbents across party. You have in DAP, Keadilan, and UMNO. And this may cause low turnout or defeat. And what are the solutions? One is to fix it between first past the post. Second is go beyond it, and this can be a midterm solution. We should introduce party list system alongside our first past the post. So you can have party list candidates which would be centrally decided. So the party can fill their new talents there, and you can apply group quota for women, youth, or minorities. At the same time, you should give more greater say for the local input, not necessarily by the branches alone, but maybe using opinion poll to know what the people want in deciding constituency candidates. And this is my last slide, professionalizing Malaysian politics. We need a political upgrade. We have to recognize that multi-party democracy is built on division. The word party comes from part. Part means division. If we do not have divisions, we do not have democracy. If you really want unity in all sense, you need to apply a citizenship act with North Korea. One nation, one people, one language, one culture, one party, and one dear leader. But democracy requires division to provide check and balance, choice, and competitions. And how do people ask these two questions? How do we move away from communal politics? My answer is that you have to develop non-communal divisions. You cannot do away division. You have to develop non-communal divisions. And how to move away from corruptions? We have to enhance policy competition. Because when party can win based on patronage, they don't need policy competitions. That leads to bad mismanagement, ill management, but also patronage, which would lead to corruptions. So we really want to do this. We have to get our politicians fighting on each other on ideas, not on who and whose ancestor comes to this country first, not on whose God is truer than others. So professionalizing politics means we need division between good people with different ideas, not seeing themselves as good people and all their opponents as bad people. We need product differentiation during elections. We need to be more serious about manifesto, but also to make sure the manifesto would not stand in the way after elections for government formation negotiation. So we need compatibility between elections. And I'll end my lecture here. Thank you so much again to the Academy Professor Malaysia for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Professor Dr. Wong for being on the dot in your presentation, and also for your enlightening us of the outcomes of your based on your presentations. So I'm going to elaborate. Let's allow our discussions to respond to your presentations, and also later on we allow Q&A at the end of our presentation. So with our first discussions this morning, we have Professor Dr. Muhammad Azizuddin Muhammad Sani. Welcome, Prof, to APMs. Prof. Dr. Muhammad Azizuddin Muhammad Sani is a professor in politics and international relations, UUM College of Law, Government and International Relations. He was a visiting fellow at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, or ASIAS, Singapore, and visiting professor at the National Institute of Development and Administration, NIDA, Bangkok, Thailand. He has published widely in many international journals and actively share his view and insight with local international media agencies on topics such as human rights, civil liberties, media politics, democratizations, Malaysian politics, and he also is a member of APM. So, Prof, welcome to the floor, and the floor is yours.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning. Thank you, Prof. Azizul. And first of all, I think I want to express my gratitude to particularly the Academy of Professional Malaysia for invited me as a discussant for this session by Professor Dr. Wong Chin Huat. And also thank you for Prof. Datuk Saleh for your kind introduction earlier. And also at the same time, also I'm glad to see also Prof. Francis Loh for some time, I think. Now finally we met online. I wish we met face to face. Okay, thank you very much again for the invitation, and I think I will thank you very much for to Prof. Wong Chin Huat, because you enlightened us a lot of things, from Malaysian past and also the present, and also probably what we expect for the future after the GE15. So and I concur with many of your arguments. Probably I have some more alternative view in looking of the aspect from the beginning until the end of your presentation just now, particularly when it comes to the issue of stability of government. Even though we talk about the discourse, the narrative right now, mostly about how to establish the stable government. And but in reality, actually, when we talk about stable political stability in Malaysia, actually is there compared to many other nations, which are in trouble. I think we used to be compared with Sri Lanka previously, but somehow we never, replicate Sri Lanka because we are very stable. But what we are looking now in the context of Malaysia is how to establish a stable government. Okay, I think that's we have to bear in mind in the aspect of our discussion today. And when you talk about earlier in regard to the aspect of divided society, for example, when we touch on theories such as consociationalism or majoritarian theory, and central capitalism as well. Theory, for example, actually both theory look in the context of divided society, how to stabilize the countries, and somehow Malaysia actually not implementing both of the theory, but what we practice in Malaysia somehow a kind of a modified consociationalism, meaning that all aspect of the four, for example, element of consociationalism, we actually partly practice in Malaysia, but one important aspect, which is professionalism, actually we are not really implementing this because it's related to our electoral system as well. Whether we are going towards still continue with first past the post, or are we going towards professional representation in our system. So that's why I think what we discuss now is about modified constitutionalism. And when it comes to Donald Horwitz's theory on central capitalism, which I think might suggest that we encourage more multiracial, multicultural political party to compete to overcome the single race-based or ethnic-based political party, which is I think not really turned into a reality in Malaysia, even though we have multiracial political party in Malaysia, but still dominated by certain ethnic group, like PKR with Malay, DAP with Chinese, Gerakan with Chinese dominated member group, So meaning that in reality it's not turned out to be a truth in the context of political competition in Malaysia. Okay, but having looking at constitutionalism and central capitalism, actually what we discussed is about ethnic politics. I know Professor Faisal's law probably interests more on caste politics, but for me, I think I'm looking at the other aspect. For example, why not we discuss about the people needs nowadays? Because we can see that since year 2000 until today, the discourse actually about a new politics in Malaysia, which is triggered by three movements, which is the civil society movement, which is become more advanced now, and also the youth, for example, movement. And I think there's another one is which I want to highlight actually the establishment of the new avenue for political engagement by the people directly to the rulers or to the leaders, political leaders, through the internet, for example. Meaning that we have a social media aspect of that. So what actually we want and we should actually look on the context of Malaysia, actually people want to engage directly in politics, meaning that people are interested in politics. So that's, I think, the idea of deliberative democracy, I think, should be in place in the discourse, the current discourse in Malaysian politics, even though it's still new, but need to be added because people want to engage themselves. And because if you say that Malaysian people, they are very apathy, I don't think so, because in terms of turnout rate in every election is very high. Even though we can talk just now about Melaka state election and also Johor state election, which is very low. But I think when it comes to generation 15, I think we can see that it's going to be very high, even though the turnout rate in terms of percentage might be low, but turnout rate is still very high. So I think in this context, ethnic politics is always there, but we need to see a different discourse in the context of Malaysian politics. So I think you just now you trace on several other aspects. For example, you touch on CSA, which is I think very important if we have a minority government. But this just a temporary solution. It's not really a permanent solution for the country. We still need to have a majority government, which I think will bring stability and to govern well in the context of Malaysia. So temporary solution should be okay. But when it comes to you discuss about grand coalition, what we expect, I think, going to be a super grand coalition, because we already have a grand coalition, and we are one of the unique country in the world where the grand coalition actually created before the election. And what we see now, the competition between BN, PN, PA, GTA, even GPS, and also GRS, I think all is a grand coalition. But I agree with you. There is, by looking of the coming election, there's no single coalition can form a government. It needs a super coalition that can bring together parties in order to form a government. So that's why I think in order to have that, we need to have a strong leader. Who's that leader? I think probably we can look on our poster boy. Who's the credible one to form the government? So, okay, just now I just comment a few things about what your discussions now when you talk about Amanat Haji Hadi. I have different view a bit about Amanat Haji Hadi. Even though I disagree with the Amanat, but I think actually the Amanat Haji Hadi is a way of pass to respond not to local politics, actually more on international politics, which is in 1979 when we have Iranian Islamic Revolution, and PAS took the opportunity to champion this cause to establish an Islamic state. That's why there are many criticism to our democratic system. But later on, I think they agree that in order to form a better government, a good government, they need to follow the the democratic process in Malaysia. So meaning that the election still the system that they can accept. And I think from there, they are very consistent from the the election 1982 until today. They never take other than election to be in power. So I think that's the change that they made. I'm not sure whether they still subscribe to Amanat Hadi, but I think the process that they took until today actually following the democratic process that I think is needed in our countries. Okay. Okay. One thing is which I think I want to touch a bit about the aspect of grand coalition, because you mentioned about in 1990s we have two coalition system, or two party system. Then suddenly it's changed to that. Okay, I have a discussion with Datuk Khalid Nordin, former Menteri Besar Perak, Menteri Besar Johor. He said that Barisan Nasional, why it appeals to the people when the position is in central. But when they move, okay. In reality, all political party within Barisan Nasional actually they are right wing. But somehow when they become part of the coalition, they become central. But the problem is that since you mentioned since 2013, they moved to the right. So it's not appealing to the masses, most masses. And that I think makes a sudden change to Barisan Nasional. Even though we can see that a significant number of the population, particularly the Malays, is supporting Barisan Nasional. So, but if you look on the trajectory of Barisan Nasional, it losing ground, meaning that it losing support since 1999. But okay, why they're losing support? Okay, this I think related to Professor Loh used to write something about the middle class movement. I think we have a huge number of middle class in Malaysia, about probably almost 60% of population middle class living in urban areas, suburban area. They actually want something different. And the reformasi movement that happened in 1999 actually is a trigger point done by Anwar Ibrahim to kickstart the movement to change the nation. I think you can see from 1999, even though 2004, Barisan Nasional won the biggest in the history, but suddenly they dropped until they lost in 2018. So because the tsunami that we talk about in the last election, actually a tsunami of middle class, because they want to change everything to a new kinds of politics. So, but the problem of us now in Malaysia, when we have a grand coalition like Barisan Nasional, the alternative to that, like you mentioned, Barisan Rakyat, Pakatan Pemuda Ummah, Barisan Alternatif, what else? Pakatan Rakyat, all actually they're not an alternative. Actually, they are trying to replicate Barisan Nasional. So the model of politics is still the same. So what happens now when Pakatan took over the government? Then they lost because the agenda of Pakatan actually a mixed match between the agenda to reform, but sudden there's some group, for example, Bersatu still have an agenda to maintain like what you call Keturunan Melayu, everything. So it is collapse. So now when we have at least four grand coalition, even though we can see Barisan Nasional, Pakatan Harapan still have some more advantage compared to the others, but people now on the ground confused, including the middle class also confused, because they can see the difference between all these political parties, all almost the same. So in that way, it's difficult actually. It's difficult for the people now to determine who is the best to form a government. That's why I think they will look on not only party, but they will look on the personality that can lead the nation. Okay, probably several last of the point that I want to make, which is I think probably about okay, decentralization, for example. Decentralization, it require a very in-depth discussion about this. Not simply we can allow, because even though you can see that decentralization will somehow discourage hate politics. I think for me it will encourage hate politics, because it will trigger more the sentiment of states rather than we as a nation. Because when we talk about Ben Henderson, about the emergent community, about Samsul Amri, for example, talking about nation of intents, actually it's they are, meaning that we want to create an identity of Malaysia. Because problem is now we identify based on our ethnicities, not really as a nation. So by allowing this decentralization, it become more state, identity with prevalence over the national identity. Even like, for example, like in Johor, we already talk about Johor, Bangsa Johor. Yeah? So I'm not sure, I think it will break the nation if we're not carefully in implementing decentralization. So I think even though the idea is good, but I'm not sure whether it's practical to be implemented. So I think it requires to have more discussion and also deliberation on this aspect. And last point, I think you also mentioned about the election turnout rate. Turnout rate is very low because parties on. I think it's also happened everywhere around the world, particularly among the youth. But we have situation in the nation where people are scared to vote. That's why I think when it comes to GE15, it changed dramatically. I think people eager to vote. Even in my survey also, I can see about more than 80%. I think close to 90% of the young voters, I think they will turn out, except for probably automatic voters. Automatic voters are a bit difficult because they never voted. We don't expect them to vote in this combination. That's why I think in terms of turnout rate, it's going to be high, but a percentage is going to be low compared to the last election. So I think that's all from me. Prof. Azizul, later on, probably if needed further, I think I will respond.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Azizul, for responding to Prof. Wong. Wong is quite interesting, but we are running out of time. Actually, I stick with the time that given to us. So I would like to invite Dr. Francis Loh Kok Hua. But before that, I would like to introduce Dr. Francis first to the audience. Dr. Francis Loh Kok Hua was a professor of politics at the University of Science Malaysia. Presently, he is a senior advisor to the Forum of Federation Ottawa. He wrote a couple of books. His book include The New versus the Old Politics, Malaysian State and Society in Transitions, Regime Change in Malaysia, and also the Xaverian's Journey, the story of Lasallian's School in Penang, Malaysia, from 1787 to 2019. And Dr. Francis also was a secretary of Aliran for 20 years and a president for 5 years from 2011 to 2016. He previously taught at Monash University, Australia. So, Dr. Francis, the floor is yours. We would like to listen to your response to Professor Wong. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Moderator, Dr. Azizul. Yang berbahagia, Professor Muhammad Saleh Jaafar, our President of APM, Professor Dr. Muhammad Azizul. You laid very nice backdrop for me to enter the discussion. And of course, Zahrul, our coordinator, he's been chasing us and then get us all to be scheduled to be on time. And of course, Dr. Wong Chin Huat, my good friend. We've known each other for a long time. He used to only wear black shirt. Now he wears a bit more colorful clothes.
Still black.
Yeah. Okay, salam bahagia. Let me just from the outset say that I agree with what Chin Huat is saying when he talks about that we are going to have a hung parliament. For sure. I think that's going to be on the cards. And I think as a result of that, then he's told us that, be careful. When this happens, it doesn't necessarily mean it will be unstabling. Be careful. It might not really mean that you will actually be, you have to be calm about this kind of things. And you told us, that when you calonkan seorang to become Prime Minister or CM, or Menteri Besar, just one person will do. Don't create havoc by, and preferably don't go and see the Sultan to try to resolve this problem. Give him one calon. So I think these are all very healthy, very good advice for us to really consider. I'm less sanguine with him, less sanguine about his idea that actually we are so, we can be like a Germany, like a New Zealand, that we are, in spite of having a hung parliament, we will be quite stable. I think the reverse could be true, because the difference between our country and those countries is that they have many, many other stable institutions. We don't. And the Pakatan's term in office was only less than 2 years. It didn't have the opportunity to reform our institutions. So I'm talking about our civil service, I'm talking about universities, I'm talking about judiciary. We changed the top people, the bottom people, we don't know yet. We are talking about actually the universities, we are talking about SPR, change a bit, the old style came back again, MACC, and so on and so forth. Our institutions are a bit lacking, as compared to a German situation, a civil. So because of that, what we ended up having in Malaysia was actually UMNO BN became the most powerful political institution in the country. And actually it held the center. It ruled for 60 years. Of course, it dominated over judiciary, it sacked the people they didn't like, it dominated over civil service, they absorbed people, became part of them, and so on and so forth, and they went into industry and so on and so forth. So actually, the most powerful institution for me in the country is actually the political party called UMNO BN. The problem for us today now is that the BN has disappeared, and the UMNO, in the last elections, they only collected 24% of all the seats in parliament. In contrast to last time, almost 50%, 49%. They could hold the center together. So for me, actually, we are going to enter into a period, because of the hung parliament, a period of, I participated in a conference, recently organized by PSSM, and we talked about kemelutan politik. And I think this is going to be a period of porak-poranda, kacau bilau, sedikit sebanyak keganasan tapi tak ada, no violence. But I think this is how and the state of our economy also is troubling. It's troubling because actually we are stuck. We do not have, the leap forward to the next stage, and I'm a bit surprised that Chin Huat's presentation this morning did not actually mention anything about the economy. Didn't talk actually about how our economy transformed itself over the last 60 years, how the economy then spawned social transformation of our society, including what Dr. Azizuddin rightly pointed out, the rise of the middle class in Malaysia. And because of the NEP, it is a multi-ethnic middle class. And this is very important for me. And for me, the fragmentation of our culture, our society already was evident in 1992. And at that time, we did a book. And the title of our book is actually called The Fragmented Vision, Culture and Politics in Contemporary Malaysia, 1992. This was because of actually the rise of what happened in Operasi Lalang, how Dr. Mahathir had a conflict with Tunku Razali. The whole system broke right down the middle. Team A, Team B, then became, Semangat 46 and UMNO Baru. And then there was the rise of the Dakwah movement as well. And in this book, Professor Jomo and Ahmad Shabri Chik, they talk about the different strands of the Dakwah movement. Iqmal Muhammad Said talked about actually even the leftist movement had differences among themselves. Within the Chinese education movement, you also had, differences between MCA versus, the DAP, and also the Tong Jiao Zhong separately. I talked about the rise of regionalism in, Sabah. And another woman talked about even in culture, you could see these distinctions. The classic study in that volume was actually one by our friend who's passed away, Koo Kay Jin. And Koo Kay Jin talked about how actually there were actually important distinctions emerging between Dr. Mahathir on the one hand and Tunku Razali's camp on the other. My point is that fragmentation began to take place already. And this is why then, over a period of the next 20 years, I began to talk about how come when you look at the elections, it didn't result in change. And for me, actually, it was because of developmentalism. In the 1990s, Dr. Mahathir pulled things together after especially Operasi Lalang. He pulled things together and our economy began to bubble up. And a lot of FDI started coming into the country. Restructured our entire society. The middle class emerged. So I think this is some category that we have to work into our consideration. I think what is so significant about what has just happened last Saturday, when we look at all the newspapers and listen to Bernama and all that, they were reporting about who was contesting where, 10 candidates here, 9 candidates there, Batu, how many people. Finally, electoral politics or fragmentation emerged in the electoral political process. But it was already there, even within the Malay community, Chinese community, Kadazan community, everybody had so many distinctions. So the question that I want to ask Dr. Wong and other people as well who continue to harp on actually just ethno-religious factors in determining the shape of Malaysian politics, the question then becomes, is this not important? Is this fragmented? Is it still actually ethnic politics that's the factor for mobilizing people when actually Malays are divided into 5, 6, 7 groups politically? Chinese have been divided for a long time already into how many groups? Indian community also, you don't know. I mean, MIC, IPK, and the what do you call it? Different groups. So my point is actually, why do we continue to only harp on ethnic and potential ethnic conflict? And this is where I disagree strongly with the statement that you quoted for us from Horowitz, which is that actually in an ethnic conflict situation, you can only have one group in the center, and actually the other on the wings are pushed to the side, and they begin to turn extremists. For me, actually, when you want to build a nation, you can actually build it along ethno-genealogical lines, which means actually you overemphasize your genealogy. What is your cultural background? What is your language? What is your religious belief? Might be your future? Or you could also begin to build the nation along civic territorial lines, which cross-cuts across race, religion, age, gender, disabilities, and so on and so forth. And I think we must begin to push for the building of a nation along civic territorial lines. Citizenship is the common ingredient for all, regardless of your age, your religion, your gender, your class status, and so on and so forth. So this is a formula. I wish this must be brought back. And I think this is what Pakatan Harapan has been trying to do. The whole PKR movement, when they talk about, the Buku Jingga and the Ketuanan Rakyat, as opposed to Ketuanan, Melayu, this is essentially it. And they're programmed to actually resolve the problems of the rural areas, regardless of the poor, regardless of race. This is actually taking on the notion of a civic territorial nation. And then our state in Malaysia was once upon a time very established, very formidable. We used to, in political science, about Indonesia, dia ada bangsa, dia tak ada negara or pemerintahan. In Malaysia, we had actually a pemerintahan, tapi bangsanya masih belum terjadi. And Dr. Mahathir said, 2020 we will have it. We are already 2022. So I think unsur-unsurnya sudah ada. And this is, for me, this is very important. Now, I just want to make one last comment at the end about your proposals for decentralizing and all that. I support that very much, and how you want to, begin to push for democracy. But I think the point to be made is we have to democratize, not to professionalize our politics. That's the wrong term. It has to be, we have to democratize, which includes decentralizing, which also includes actually creating an autonomous public space outside of parties, outside of the market, outside of the state. That autonomous public space you are already very involved in it with your whole birthday movement. I'm involved in it in my aliran and so on and so forth. And so this is the space that will actually save Malaysia for me. And this will ensure that we become pushing for this civic territorial nation. This is the space that will allow us to decentralize. And also this is a space that will begin to play watchdog over all our kleptocracy, that has emerged. For me, the problem is our parties also have to reform. And for me, unfortunately, for UMNO, Pala was trying to bring about reform of UMNO. And he actually went out this way, not just UMNO, but the country. He said, walk with me. Don't come and work for me. Walk with me. He said, I want to create this IPCMC to actually check our police force, which is, an institution which has been compromised. He said also he went after some of these big guns. He persecuted he took Eric Chia to court, and also Kasida Gadam, the minister. And he announced at that point in time, I've got 18 more people I'm looking into. Unfortunately, Aliran used to ask for, come on, give us more evidence of the 18 other people. But we missed that boat under Patla, and people have the wrong impression of him. There was a picture of him falling asleep in Parliament. And they said, look at this sleepyhead, PM. For me, actually, he was the minister, the prime minister who could actually have saved Malaysia for another period of UMNO PN rule. But we missed the boat. We got rid of him in the end. And as a result of that, the whole system then changed towards a political party, UMNO, which was dominated by the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, under the auspices of Najib Tun Razak. He built a humongous Prime Minister's office. He brought in a lot of this centralization, and the whole kleptocracy, and he's been convicted of this corruption. And his party just went to bust. So I think you cannot talk about the future if we don't fix this problem of our political parties. It's not just the coalition coming together. The economy also needs to be fixed, and we have to invest in the middle class, especially the young people, in the middle class. And they, whether we like it or not, they are crossing boundaries. They're crossing boundaries. They are building bridges with one another, and they astound me. In Penang, I gave a talk recently, the last few years, Penang Youth Development Council. Youth actually is a federal portfolio, but the Penang state government created this body, and I give them, they have a scholar democracy, year in, year out, I help them. And it's a very mixed group of people. And these people actually interact with one another so well. Aliran, my own party, not party, but organization, is a multi-ethnic. My best friends are there. They are Melayu, they are Indians, they are Chinese. So I think we must have faith in that possibility. And we cannot continue to think that, we cannot, this is, Jinhua, you're smiling. I know that I'm not accusing you of making these, errors, so to speak. But I just want to highlight because these points were not made. I know that Jinhua shares a lot of my views. We exchange views, but I just think that in a very important meeting like this, it is very important because it's Academy Professor Malaysia, actually these points need to be highlighted. So that's all for now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Francis. It's quite interesting listening to your critical response and also very energetic presentations by you. Okay, as being requested by our presenter, that because now we are running, we got another maybe 30 minutes before we end our session for this morning. So I would like to allow question and answer from the question from the participants, because we also would like to listen to what basically their view about this interesting theme or topic that we discussed this morning. Yes, so for Dr. Prof. Wong responding to discussions, maybe we leave it later at the end of after the Q&A with all our participants. So please, audiences who have any questions that you would like to ask, please forward your question in the chat box, or maybe you can talk to the mic. Please do so. We will respond to your questions immediately. We have 20 minutes for Q&A.
Prof. Azizul, first thing first, I guess Prof. Wong has got to respond to the points made by both discussants, right?
Yes, but Prof. Wong messaged me just now that to allow to Q&A just now.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, unless there are no other questions, but otherwise I would like to hear what the audience had, because I think I can respond together to their questions with what Professor Azizuddin and Professor Francis have given. No questions? Then maybe I can respond to our discussions.
Yeah, please, Prof. Wong, if no question from the floor, so maybe you can respond to both our discussions.
Right. I want to, many points have been shared and we wouldn't have time to go through all of them. So I want to respond to one point from each of our discussants. For Professor Azizuddin, the interesting point that I want to take here is that you say that we need majority government to have stability. That there are two questions to this. This can be our subjective wish, but until Sabahan and Sarawakian Party decide to join the national coalitions again, how do you get it? Can you actually, what are the way that you can actually force it to happen for the national coalitions to win close to about hundreds or even close to 110 and 12 seats in the peninsula? Without that, then by your logic, we would not have stability. So my suggestion is that, say, we have to live with the fact. And it's not so pessimistic that, as what Prof. Francis say, because that we are different from German, we cannot get to that part. The point that I want to make here, in first part, that why it can work, is that if we look at what the Ismail Sabri government did in that 13 months, that was the most stable period from mid-2019 onwards. Why I say mid-2019? Because that was a time that you see fragmentations in PH started to emerge, when the questions of secessions came to the forefront. So for that from you count from 2019 to now, we're talking about 3.5 years period, and it's expired 13 months. What's most stable? What did he have? Did he have a majority? His own majority is about 53%. But by signing a CSA with the opposition, he got a conditional majority up to 93%. What it means is that that majority protected him from any attempt to bring him down, but it did not give him a blank check. So you see the defeat of the SOSMA motion, but you don't see problems with the budget and so on. With no confidence vote, no longer the number games of who get more numbers, no longer games of statutory declaration. So that's my first point I want to make, that we have to live with hung parliament, and stability can be achieved with hung parliament. And I want to take to the third point, that what we imagine as political stability in the past does not appear to be so. When was the time that BN had the largest majority? First time was 1995, 65% of votes and 87% of seats. What happened immediately? With that result in 1995, Semangat 46 dissolved in 1996, 1998, we have Reformasi, purging of Anwar. Dominance led to instability because our elites do not know how to deal with dominance. And the second height of BN's success was 2004, 64% of votes, 91% of seats. What did it lead to? Political tsunami, because you have UMNO infighting led by Mahathir. You have Hishamuddin raising his curries 3 times, alienating the non-Malays. And even we look at PH, what happened with PH, with the decline of PH support from leading to his fragmentation, was actually his growing dominance. PH started with 121 seats before all the independents joined. By the time it collapsed, it has 139 seats. But what did that majority give to PH? It strengthened Bersatu in the fight with PKR on one hand, between Mahathir and Anwar on one hand. But on the other hand, the strengthening of PH was done by tearing apart BN. Bersatu itself took 15 MPs from UMNO. And what happened when BN was deprived of its East Malaysian minority and even its own, about 1/3 of its own MP? It went to the radical front because that's the most rational things to do. When multi-ethnic parties occupy the media, it makes sense for UMNO to go to the front. Of course, I know Dr. Francis doesn't believe in rational choice theorizing as such, but the fact here is that if you ask politicians, this is what happened. So I would conclude on this part that do we need a majority to bring back stability? I would say, first, it's not currently possible. Second, the opposite is possible. And third, the past record shows us that majority does not necessarily mean stability, especially when they win too big. Prof. Francis' point is I think we share a lot of common things, but what probably Prof. Francis felt like, why should we talk about ethnicities? And if you don't talk a bit, maybe they will go away. We should look at other things. All that, why didn't I talk about economics and so on? The point here is a very simple question. How do we deal with democracy? How do we make the civic politics you talk about viable in our democracy? How do you get it happen? If we want to talk about class politics, I think the best MP we could have is Dr. Jayakumar, the chair of PSM. He is a good MP in the House, a good MP in the constituency. He doesn't talk about ethnicity. Why would he feel? Of course, you say it's because of the coalition structure and so on, but why is it the larger question? A party like PSM cannot win support. Why are we stuck with ethnic politics? Ultimately, go back to say, we have to take, I would argue strongly that we have to take a positivist view on politics, how things work, and not let our normative preference cloud our judgment or analysis. PSM can only survive is either the true institutional reform that allow a smaller party to win representations, or that the main divider of our society has become class. And why it's not become class because of ethnicity? Certainly, I agree with Professor Francis on the fragmentation. You look at my last presentations on what the transition, I'm arguing about the fragmentation of this Malay party. So we see this, but why is it not strong enough for us to move on? Why do we get stuck with ethno-religious tensions all the time? They never get out of control, but neither do they get out of fashion. Why? Because we do not have strong enough non-communal division. That's fundamental problem. And I want to defend that Prof. Horowitz' point about that in the context of multi-ethnic competitions, when one party occupy the space, then others would have to take the flank. That was very true. And in my citation, I make it very clear it was from 1959 to 1990. That was exactly the case. Because how else are we going to explain that why we have the central left party attacking on Alliance and BN more on identity issues than class issue? DAP is theoretically a social democratic party, but realistically, it's more of a party standing for equal rights, intercommunal equality. How do we actually get all the situation? Because we do not have enough non-communal divisions. And the way to go about it, that I would say that this is where the opportunities are open for us, is the emergence of a hung parliament. When communal parties cannot unite each other, they have to develop new product differentiations among themselves. And this is where we start seeing, for example, between Bersatu and UMNO, or between PN and BN, PN tried to position itself as a Bersih coalition. The tagline was Bersih and Stabil. And this is a new dimension. How do we get the party to go further, differentiate themselves on class and so on environment? These are the things that we need to do. Because ultimately, for a multi-party democracy to work, we need competition that is professional. And there's a reason why I do not use democratizing, because the whole thing we talk about is democratization. There's nothing new towards that. But what I think that is necessary is that our politicians cannot function, cannot perform as professionally as our athletes. Our athletes would compete against each other, but they would not take each other as enemies, because they know they are part of the same league, part of the same industry. But not in our case. Our politicians are hostile, toxically hostile towards each other. They want to claim that they monopolize all the goodness and all their opponents are wicked. This is not being professional. We need to get them to realize that, say, if governance is a business, then you have to equip with not just a competence, but also the right attitude to treat your opponents as opponents, not as enemy. You need to know when to differentiate from each other and when to compromise. You need to be able to agitate your crowd, but also when to bring your crowd to peace. We need to make politics work. And that ultimately is the best guarantee for both democracy and a civic nation. Thank you. Sorry, I think a bit longer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Wong, for your elaborations of what we discussed earlier. But it seems there's no question from the audiences at the moment. So maybe, is there any questions from Prof. Azizuddin or Dr. Francis to Mr. Dr. Prof. Wong?
Reply. Can I respond?
Yes, sure.
Aziz,
Dr. Francis, please go ahead. Please proceed.
no, I just want to say that I've never, if you know that you have read my stuff, I've never said that ethnicity is not important. That's actually putting words into my mind.
Sorry, I was not
That's
being
wrong.
I
I
was
have
not being
never
angry.
said that.
Yeah.
My point is that the politicians might play ethnic politics, but we as political analysts, we do the scholarship, we must be mindful that actually economy has changed, society has been transformed, our politics is moving in new uncharted territory. And for me, that began to happen. I could see it, and my team of people, the people who worked with me in that book, Clive Kessler, Harold Crouch, Domo Sundra, we all analyzed that situation. We came to, hey, this is so fascinating, and so we began to reintroduce the concept of class into our analysis without actually trying to suggest that ethnicity is not important. No, in fact, ethnicity takes a new form. It becomes ethno-religious. It's that kind of a thing. So, that's not correct to suggest that. And I want to make that distinction between the politicians who play an ethnic game and political analysts who must be professional. Talking about professionals, I just want to highlight that in the literature, when we talk about the professionalization of politics, in the American context where I studied, it meant actually the political parties begin to create, and their end all is no longer any program. Their end all is actually, we want to get back to office the next time. So the whole period in between, they're collecting money for the next round, just like what they're doing right now in the midterm elections in America. So professionalization is a very bad word. They dress slickly, they talk glibly, but actually they are empty. So I wanted to just make that corrective. I mean, in the British context, maybe it's slightly different. But in the literature on American politics, the professionalization begins to take place at a certain point in time, where actually then you end up in a situation where the president, the Congress, two houses of parliament, the governors, they don't give too much attention to the real problems of the rakyat. And that's why Donald Trump comes along. So I mean, we have to begin to understand. You're talking about professionalization. Where? What example are we talking about? Is it America? Is it the UK? Is it Australia? I like Arden, but is it the New Zealand? But, professionalization, then what is the context? For me, it's actually quite negative to talk about professionalization. I want to talk about how in the future, actually, we must open the space up. And I make a huge distinction, I've been writing about this, between big P, power politics, concerned about elections, small p, people-oriented, friendly, participative politics of everyday life in between elections. And I want to actually nurture that. And I think that will sustain us for the future. Not the big P politics. I've become very cynical about that. But small P politics, but I'm not saying we get rid of it. Everybody must come out to vote on the 19th. Must, and you know who to vote for. But we must build small P politics as well. And that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I do not object to the building up of the small P politics, but I think the formal politics need to be transformed. It need to be made more professional. And nowhere at all I refer to the American model. You look at my works, I seldom make a reference to American model because it's a very different political system. It's presidential, it's hyper decentralized, hyper monetarized, and so on. The example I was looking at is continental, where you actually have moving away from the adversarial types of parliamentary politics. You look at continental politics, it's much more deliberative. I mean, not to the extent that they would invite everyone's all the time to invite the people to take part. It's not an idea of citizen assembly, but continental politics is professional. People acknowledge and say, we are different, we have different ideas to compete, and whoever wins, we should not treat others as outcasts, as enemies, as insurgents or whatsoever. This is something we cannot deal with because our politicians don't moralize their cause.
Point well taken. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Wong. Thank you, Dr. Francis. Maybe Prof. Azizuddin want to say something? You are muted, Prof.
Okay, sorry. In terms of what Prof. Wong respond to just now, I think I don't want to respond to that. I think I want to add some more aspect because I remember yesterday I read your slide. You mentioned about promotion of political competition to reduce patronage competition. This I think is very tough to see the eradication of the patronage system in Malaysia because I think all parties doing it. It comes from two aspects, which is our party system, which is really unlike party system in the West. So that's why Western theory sometimes cannot be applicable to our context because our political party actually different. We are more a bit mass-based movement when we have hierarchical structure, and in order to survive, they have to practice patronage system, politics. It also come from our political culture, feudalistic political culture, feudalistic minded, which is to makes people rely on the leader for welfare, for example. That's why there's political party is a bit difficult to perform, or political leader, or member of parliament, for example, or adun can perform their duty like what the Westerners counterpart can do, but they have to take care even to pay bills for the electorates in their constituencies. So to that kind of extent, they have to protect their loyal supporter in order to secure the win in the election. But the problem now is that previously is carried by Barisan Nasional to UMNO, even MCA, MSC, but now also carried by other political parties. So that's why I think even though we can encourage competition to eradicate this, but I think it will enhance this actually by having competition. So I don't know whether you can respond to that to this, Prof. Wong, and
Right.
looking in the context of this.
Sure. I think all parties at the end, when you come to elections, the candidates want to win support. People would ask and say, "What do you have in offer?" And some of us like to imagine that, as rightly so, that we vote in the elected representative to make law, to scrutinize government, and so on. But for a lot of voters, they were just basically looking at, say, what they can bring home to the constituency. As one MP put it very bluntly, MPs are seen by some voters as just ATM machine. And that's really patronage. And why so? Because it goes back to our parliamentary institutions, fall back to its first function. It's not about making law, not approving budget, not scrutinizing the government, but installing and dismissing government. Parliament is an electoral college for the executive in the parliamentary system. And so if you can actually install the government and the government reward you by giving you more patronage and you win the support, we would never, ever get out of party hopping problem. In the last Sabah elections, we had in between 2018 to 2020, we had 24 aduns who crossover party. We're not talking about coalitions. 17 of them returned to their own constituency to seek re-elections. 11 of them won. Basically, if you have jumped to a party affiliated with the federal government, you can retain your constituency. But if you jump to become an independent, you're likely to lose it. Because ultimately, people are voting for the patronage. And this is where the trouble is. We talk about policy and so on, but when your lawmakers are not actually policy savvy, our choice are actually the technocrats or whoever consultant they hire from the private sector. And we cannot hold them accountable. So we want to change all this. We need to get our politicians to compete on the idea, even though it started off with something maybe with a strong identity considerations. For example, you want to come up with a policy that disproportionately help one ethnic group to others. But in the process, if you develop an idea, a justification for that, then over time, we would have competitions over idea. We would look at our lawmakers and say, now, what are the contents of your debate? How you have changed things? Then we can make democracy more participatory or even deliberative at some point in the future. But we need to have these differences. There's of course one thing standing in the way. Our electoral system, first past the post, is single member, is local in nature. So it actually reward that's where you need the reform from the party. And that's what Prof. Francis talked about. We need to reform the parties. Of course, that's another issue. But what we can do, one of the things to change it, is to allow voters to vote on party basis. Now, that doesn't solve every problem because you can still have parties that build on personality cult. But some parties, sooner or later, would actually develop their programmatic selling point. Or some party that's already has, like PSM, would get a chance to actually gain representations on their own. And this would actually force us to talk more about policy. But all this cannot happen if we are left with competitions, binary competitions that would just deny everyone. And once they're in power, they just occupy the power and to maximize incumbents' advantages. That's my main critiques on the 22 months of PH. I think PH was guilty of not doing their best, and their short-sightedness is one of the very reasons why they ended up with the Sheraton law.
Okay, Professor Wong, I think we are almost to the ends of our sessions for guest lecture series this morning. But anyway, I would like to respond, Dr. Prof. Wong, to respond to one question from Reza Ali in the chat box, that he said that it is not possible to reform or legislate the way political parties operate, for example, primaries or local chapter selection for candidates. Would that not solve this problem of patronage? Maybe you would like to respond to that?
Sure, thank you. It's a very good question. I did spend some time looking into this. I think it would be quite problematic for the state to legislate and impose on every party, because you would like the party to have some freedom to choose on this. But ultimately, it comes down to something more than legal requirement. Why that our party refuse to do this, or it doesn't make sense for the party to allow a bottom-up candidate selection? One major obstacle is coalition politics. Because if you compare with UK, all the three main parties in England, they will contest basically every constituency. And so it makes sense for the party chapter to decide beyond the political culture. But in our case, the party would have to negotiate that, okay, how many seats I get, how many seats you get. And they tend to have party branches beyond the constituency they contest. That's the reason why they want to form coalitions, right? So their constituency, let's say I'm UMNO, well, UMNO is not a very good case, but let's say I'm UMNO, I have a constituency, a branch in a division in Sapute. It's not going to win even contest in that seats, but I keep it there because it will support MCA. And if I'm from the UMNO Sapute, I would fight for nomination in elsewhere when UMNO get to stand. But what it all means is that it creates the need for coordinations, and the party leaders seize on it, and that gives them the chance to put in their cronies, their families, and so on, their key supporters, to the extent that even popular incumbent can be easily dropped. And one of the ways to overcome it within first past the post is perhaps to introduce opinion poll, so that we know that, and make it public, so that sometimes even you employ maybe three opinion poll, three pollster, to run so that to overcome institutional bias or any factional bias, that would probably a short-term solution. But a medium-term solution, I would say, introduce party lists so that the party have a choice to put their recruits, new talents, and so on, and let the local branches having more say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Wong. Because we are running out of time, because we are doing the live streamings under Astro Awani. So according to the schedules that we need to have some closing remarks. Maybe, is there any Professor Wong would like to say 1 minute before we wrap up our session this morning?
We should not fear hung parliament, which will almost inevitably happen after 19th of November. We just need to make the rules clear and be ready with a new game. And it can be rewarding for our politics to go to the next level. Ultimately, we just need to remember that multi-party democracy is built upon healthy and productive divisions that move away from ethnicities, language, religions, and so on. It is possible for us to change, but first of all, you must go out to vote on the 19th of November. If you don't vote, you are leaving the decisions to fill up 222 MPs, 116 ADUNs, 1 Prime Minister, potentially 3 Deputy Prime Minister, 3 MPs, perhaps 60 to 70 Federal Minister and Deputy Minister, and 30 State Exco to strangers. Trust yourself. Don't place your trust on the stranger. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Wong. For Prof. Azizuddin, is there any last words before we wrap up our session this morning? You're muted.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I think the thing that we discussed today, I think a bit heavy and very, we use very technical terms, and I hope the audience here can understand what we discussed. But what we try to figure out actually is what the best for the countries, and based on that, if it require for anybody who want to get more information, explanation from us, I think we are willing to accommodate that. So thank you very much for inviting me also as part of the this as a discussion for this panel, and hopefully it can contribute something for the betterment of the country. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Azizuddin. Dr. Francis?
Yes, again, like Chin Huat says, come out to vote. Make sure you come out, especially the young people on the 19th. And it's very important, and he's correct, that hung parliament will not necessarily be unstabling, but you must resolve that problem. And I think after that, after the hung parliament nonsense, actually we invest in small p politics, which is participatory. And Izzuddin, remember, you mentioned deliberative democracy, very important concept. And I think in this regard, one last point about going to look at our neighbor Indonesia, where they have actually introduced tremendous local government reform after Reformasi. And Jokowi himself came out from that tradition. He's not a general, he's not a very famous political family. He was his father ran a furniture shop, and he's the president now, after he became governor of Solo and then governor of Jakarta, and he became president. Lessons for us to learn from our neighbors, Indonesia. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Francis. However, the academics, the academic professor do give me a few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes to give some view for the closing remarks. I believe it was an interesting discussion for all of us. That we are waiting for on the 19th of this November for us to exercise our right and responsibility. But yeah, we are looking forward. We want to see what will be the outcome of the election, whether it's going to be another parliaments, because we experienced it, kind of experienced for during the last elections. The government keep on changing in one elections. Yeah. So is that going to happen again? But just food for thoughts that there are a few things that I believe that we do talk about coalition, single party, dual party coalitions, or talking about whether the majority parties will taking the lead. But there are a few things that I think will decide in terms of the winnings of any parties. That we haven't talked about the manifesto, that they came up with a couple of manifesto, all the parties came up with manifesto. Recently, the Barisan Nasional came out with manifesto. So whether that will determine whether which party is going to win, yeah, that also will be quite interesting. And also, there are things that I believe that in terms of fake news in the social media, that will determine, will influence the voter in this coming 19th November election. So regardless whether if we're going by the party going to win, who will be the candidates, but rest assured that the facts that I mentioned just now also will be one of factors that will determine, will decide which party is going to win. Yeah, so I believe with that note, I would like to thank Prof. Wong for deliberating your ideas, your view about this. We really appreciate it. And also not forgetting Prof. Izzuddin for responding. Well, it was a marvelous response from you, and not forgetting that Dr. Francis, who is all seasoned scholars that has been with us for many years in giving his views. And I also would like to thank Dato' Muhammad Saleh for giving me the opportunity to moderate this session this morning, and also to Dr. Zahrul for assisting us for making these events successful, I believe. With that note, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So Dr. Zahrul, you have anything to say?
Yeah, yes. Thank you, Prof. Wong, Prof. Izzuddin, Dr. Francis, for your enlightening insights and active participation in discussions, and also to Prof. Azizul for moderating the session. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of the ceremony. It is hoped that the lecture and discussions that we had will benefit all of us. And thank you for joining us today, and we wish you a pleasant day ahead and stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very
Dan
much.
kalau kita boleh ambil gambar sekejap, boleh ke? A group photo, please.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Kalau semua boleh buka kamera sekejap, we can have a group photo. Yeah.
We have lost some people.
Prof. Rahman is there.
Sorry.
Datuk Rahman is there. Yeah.
Rahman is there.
Oh.
All right then. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Okay. I think second page. 1, 2, 3. All right then. I think that's all from